Welcome back to our channel. My name is Ismaine and Robin. I'm the co-host of this video show, this channel. I'm with my good friend Robin Kerner, who is also the co-host, and welcome back to From the Outside In. Robin, it's been how many months that you and I we haven't
Been a
had a
long time,
chance
Ismaine.
to do that, and I'm very happy to be able to go back to it with you again. Today's we are going to discuss of something that I think is dear to you. But before that, let us know how was your summer.
Oh goodness. Oh, I could spend ages talking about my summer. I was briefly in Princeton and Oxford teaching about 300 wonderful young people, mostly 16 and 17 years old, subjects in the humanities, so philosophy, politics, economics, history, and hopefully turning them into better thinkers, more critical thinkers, and maybe giving them a bit of an edge to get into the university of their choice, which for some of them was Oxford, some Cambridge, some Princeton, some
Oh,
Harvard, etc. You get the idea. So it's a very satisfying thing that I get to do in communicating with those young people. I spent much of the beginning of the year interviewing hundreds of them, 700 interviews I did. And then I ended up getting to teach about 300 of them. So that was all very good. And that was in my capacity as the academic dean of the John Locke Institute. But now I'm back home and doing other things for a while, including getting to talk to you, my friend, for the first time in ages. How was your
yes.
summer?
Mine was, work. I had family from France coming to visit, my in-laws and one of my sisters, but also a lot of taking care of the kids. Right, it's my life now. So between work, French family, and the kids, was a full summer for me. Maybe not as exciting as yours, but exciting enough that it's I can see my kids growing and enjoying the summer. So I think that was it for me. Plus
That's
work.
wonderful.
uh,
Wonderful. Yeah.
let's get started. Today we are going to discuss something that, as I said, is dear to you. But let me start with this: the Queen is dead. Long live the King. Is it right? Is it right?
Indeed, indeed. That
All
is
right.
what we
There you
have
go.
to say now if we're British, which is a weird thing for a Brit to say because nearly all Brits who are alive now have never said "Long live the King."
Well, I
Um,
said it. I am not
yes, you
British.
said it, and you're not even British. No, and we have to sing it, when we sing the national anthem. Um, Now it's King, not Queen. I mean, we all knew it was coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
As
Indeed.
we like to say in England, she had a good innings, right? That's a cricket metaphor. 96 years was it of amazing service. I mean,
70. Was it like 70 years of service? I think she became queen at
oh,
the age of
sorry, no, of course.
26.
Yes, no, you're right. You're right. 70 years of service,
Me, the
96
French,
years of
teaching
age.
you things like
Yes,
this. Come on, man.
yeah. I got a Frenchman correcting me on the British monarchy.
My God.
This is it. This is what we need. uh, Sometimes I'm not as sharp as I like to think I am.
No, you are, my
Okay, so
friend. You are.
no,
Don't worry
you're
about
right.
it.
You're right. Of course, 70 years of service, but 96, I think, years
Yeah.
of an extraordinary life. Yeah, I know why you said it was dear to me or something like that because I wrote an article that I know we're going to discuss.
Well, you wrote an
Um,
article, and that we're going to discuss. But also, look, 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, or a few years ago, you became a U.S. citizen.
mm,
But you are from UK, as many know. People following us now know that you're from UK. So you were a UK citizen for several decades. I'm not going to say your age here, but and your allegiance was to the Queen, I guess, at this time was to the UK, right? And your whole life was until you came to the US, and still today you still have family. So that's why I say dear, because there's an emotional, almost a physical attachment at that point, right? And so that's why I said that.
no, absolutely. I mean, of course, that's true. And, I have obviously kind of, I guess we could call them patriotic feelings towards the UK, the country of my birth, just as I do to the United States, my adoptive nation that I worked so hard to become a part of. Uh, yes, I mean, the UK made me. The US is what I'm doing with it, right?
Yes, same
Um,
for
and
me,
you
for France.
exactly, and I think you feel both of those things deeply. And actually years ago, must have been about, the better part of 10 years ago, I wrote an article that I think I called "On Becoming a Bipatriot." And I talked about that feeling of patriotism in kind of two directions. But I should say, to the discussion about the Queen here, I mean, I've never been like my politics. I'm something of a classical liberal, and so I'm not like some raving monarchist or something. Although I do think there's a bizarre accidental genius in the institution that we can also talk about. But it's not something you'd design, and it's this constitutional monarchy that the Brits have. And I'm pretty sure it's not something that we would design with the kind of political views that we have. But what I was struck most by when she passed, I think, was that so many other people who had absolutely no connection to her, patriotic or otherwise, seemed to care about it. And in a way that I think is remarkable. I'm not going to say it's quite unique. Maybe it is, but certainly extraordinary, certainly something of a major outlier. And I wanted to explore that a little bit. And I think there was an extent to which the extraordinary response to the death of the Queen was related to the extraordinary way in which she lived her life and indeed served her country. And I don't think anybody with a brain cell could argue that she didn't do that. She clearly did.
Yep, yep. So let me piggyback on that, Robin, because in your article, which it's on the Brownstone Institute for anyone who wants to figure out, and probably on your website as well,
Yes.
robinkerner.com, service and restraint, lost principle of governance, and you start with this. You mentioned the French president, and I absolutely, I usually don't agree with the French president, the current French president, but right on what he said, I absolutely agree with that. He said, to you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen. As a still a French citizen, I spent 33 years of my life there in Europe. He's absolutely right. For me, it was the queen. This is probably the only one I've heard in my lifetime. And so she was the queen, the only one I've known. I didn't know about her much, but yeah, I knew that there was a queen, and I was able to know her name, and she was here when I was born. So she was the queen for a lot of people like me. For you, she was your queen, and that makes me think of this question. What do you think, from your perspective? She was the queen for people like me and for the people in Europe, and she was your queen. What do you think President Macron had such strong, good words toward her?
It does seem that her life of service was, in the literal sense, exemplary. I mean, she managed to do a job of service, and we can argue about the whole privilege issue separately, but
Exactly.
she had a role of service that constrained her massively. This was a woman who in 70 years was not actually able to offer an opinion on anything, because of the negative effects that could have with respect to her role as the constitutional monarch. So there were many things she could not do in her life of service that we take for granted. I mean, also the obvious thing that, if she sneezed at the wrong time, that would be on the front pages of every newspaper around the world, kind of thing. Indeed, if her grandchildren did, so it would be. So she had no privacy. She had a life that I could not have lived it. There was no privilege in the world you could have given me that would have made me sign up for that life. And yet she didn't choose it, but she embraced it from a very young age. And she regarded it as her duty now to embrace this life of service. And when I say life of service, I don't think you could emphasize this enough with respect to the Queen. Her entire life was uh, intensely busy and lived in every single particular for the people of her country. And because of her particular role, her ego had to be completely out of it, right? Her personality had to be completely out of it, certainly in the specifics of her work. So in that we get a contrast to every other political leader. I mean, she was a political leader. She was the head of the British state, so she had a political role in that sense. She had a constitutional role. But I think we look around the world, and nobody can actually find another leader. And we talk about the service of people in public office, but nobody could find anybody else that actually was completely dedicated, not only in their own will to service, to serving others, to serving a country, but in their execution, right? Where the execution is consistent with the declaration of duty, and it remains consistent for more years than some people are alive. And so that's what I mean by exemplary. If you asked somebody to be a lived example of dutifulness of service in a political or constitutional role, if you imagined what that would be when it was done optimally, I don't think you could imagine something more successful, more well done than the Queen's life. And I think that's something to do with I think it's a large part to do with why she was so revered, why she was called the Queen and seen as the Queen, even though she was actually technically one of many queens in the world.
Yeah, that's correct. That's right.
You know, she was doing something that was outsized, and in terms of public service, and as many British and other commentators have said, and I think I mentioned it in my article, we may never see her likes again, because if we hadn't seen her, I don't think we could even have imagined her as a life, or imagined her life as it was lived. I don't think we would really believe that anybody could pull that off. But she did. I mean, she pulled it off. And I'm not saying, she's some kind of Jesus figure, she's perfect or whatever. But in as much as anybody could be given a role that important and that big and execute it with all the human frailties that we all have, I don't think it could be done better. I mean, I can't imagine how you do it better. I couldn't do it.
I think a lot of people couldn't do it, but you mentioned something. I think a lot of people listening to this podcast will, and I've seen a lot of people on social media discussing this type of issues. You mentioned privilege, and for a lot of people who are not born and raised in the UK, who don't have your education and understanding of the monarchy here, a lot of people will say, well, she, what's the English expression, born with a golden spoon in the mouth or something like this? I forgot exactly how they say that. So a lot of people argue that. And I would love to know what is your take about that, about some people who are born like the Queen in wealth and privileges, and not so long ago, some even people mentioned that now the new king is not going, or his son are not going to pay some kind of estate taxes or stuff like this, and there was some kind of outrage about that. Again, just sharing with you what I've seen. I don't know if it's true or not, but since the death of the Queen, there were a lot of these conversations about the privilege of the Queen as opposed to her people, right? But not only her people in UK, but also, if I'm not mistaken, the Queen is also the head of Canada, of Australia, New Zealand, or something like this, right? So, and generally of people in the world. So that's the first thing for you. The second thing I've seen also a lot is about the impact that the UK over the centuries has been having on the in the world, right? And how it shaped the world. You know, we all know that UK was one of the greatest empire in the world. Has done a lot of good things and probably also a lot of bad things. And you can read on social media people say, well, you know, look at the UK, what they've done in the world, especially in the after the Second World War. So and they kind of accuse the Queen of being part of the bad things done in the world in on behalf of the UK. So, what will be your response or your take on that?
Okay, where to start? Well, my first response would be to say, what wrong decision do you think the Queen made? Like, whoever was saying that, not
Oh,
you,
okay.
but I'd be like, what is it that you think the British state has done that that is wrong, evil, or whatever you want to say, unfair, unjust, that the Queen was in any part responsible for?
I, I agree with you, and I think a lot of time is because people don't understand the role
Right.
of the Queen and how much she can reach or not actually into the political affairs of or even foreign affairs of the country, which is governed by a prime minister, right? So I think it's a great question that you're asking.
Right, and the answer, yes, because the answer is, just to be absolutely clear, and I know you know the answer, but the answer is none. Right, and then I would, but if somebody wants to take issue with actions of the British state going back to the time the Queen took her role as the Queen, as the monarch, then sure. I mean, you know, obviously nobody in their right mind is going to say the British government has behaved perfectly for the last 70 years, but yeah, I mean, I've seen obviously some of the things you're talking about, Ismaine, and what people, yeah, reasonably are caused to criticize her for is being the symbolic head of an institution that they have a problem with, that can be held responsible for in some way, you know, for historic acts that they don't approve of. But again, I mean, I, I don't quite see the point of that, because so why get angry about the Queen for that? I mean, it would be like getting angry with President Biden for something that George Washington did. I mean, what? I mean, okay, we can if we want, but what's the point? Are we really here to address and resolve injustice, or are we just kind of getting on our high horse to do that kind of moralizing thing that makes us feel so good about ourselves at the expense of somebody else? So, I mean, that would be my first take. As for privilege, I I mean, there's an obvious sense in which the Queen has privilege, but I mean, I live in zip code 98199. So anybody could look that up. That's a Seattle zip code. That's in Magnolia, a beautiful neighborhood of lots of old money in Seattle. And I would say that most of the people that live here have more privilege than the Queen. Once you net out how they get to choose to live their life and all the things they can do and all the freedoms they have, the Queen must have been one of I mean, the only people in Britain probably less free than the Queen are prison inmates, right? I mean, in terms of the number of choices she can make for her life, you know, would you be a prison inmate if you could have lots of really nice things in and the bars in your cell windows were made of gold? I wouldn't. You know, you could call it privilege because the cells in, you know, the cell windows have bars made of gold. Okay, I'm sure she was obviously materially privileged, and obviously that's unearned. Well, it's unearned up to her getting it. I think she earned it after the fact, which we can discuss. But that is true of nearly all of us who are fortunate enough to be born in this day and age in the Western world, with all the things that we have and all the wealth and freedoms and rights that we have. We're privileged. It's just, you know, it's a matter of degree. And I would say that you mentioned, which was quite interesting, her privilege relative to that of her people. It's her people who wanted her there. I mean, interestingly, the British people in general, and I'm talking between 80 and 90%, according to poll after poll, regard it as a privilege to have that monarchy. They like it. They want it. So, and we could talk about why. I mean, either all the Brits are idiots, or maybe it is actually doing some good for them. Or maybe both. So, we can discuss that. But I think to bring this together, what was interesting about the Queen was nobody can argue that she didn't have privilege. She clearly did have immense privilege in some dimensions, although I would say more than offset in others. But she earned that privilege by fulfilling the duty that came with the privilege, because you can't separate them out, right? She wasn't just a rich person born into wealth. Her wealth, she can't deploy it. She doesn't get choice about how to spend it. She can't sell it, which goes to the point about inheritance tax, by the way. No, very constrained. So she earns that privilege by fulfilling duty attached to the privilege in a way that none of the rest of us have to earn our privilege, or indeed do earn our privilege. Maybe some of us do, but a lot of us don't. Certainly a lot of the people in, as I say, my zip code, who have more millions than they're ever going to spend, aren't doing the kind of thing for that many other people that the Queen did. So I guess that would be my initial response.
So, and thank you. I think it's a good answer for people like me who don't know all of this. And obviously I don't. Could you tell us more about those duties that the Queen has to do, that many of us don't have to do, and that can balance out that wealth and that material privilege, as you said? And also, can you also discuss about, in your article, page number 3, for those who want to read it, you say, today dominant notion of moral desert and obligation in both backward looking and collective. Talking again about privilege. Do you think that all the privilege discussion that we hear after the Queen of the death of the Queen, we heard about this before, but nowadays we talk a lot about white privilege, about all of this. Do you think it's related, and is it what you mean here?
Yeah, no, you're right. It all needs to be thought of together. Yes. So what I was getting at in that article is that what she exemplified was a personal morality which involved an idea of duty, which only she as an individual was responsible for living out, right? So what she wasn't trying to do was, she wasn't trying to get institutions to do things or other people to do things. She wasn't counting what she was owed versus what she gave. She wasn't saying, I'm entitled to this, I shouldn't have to do that. She certainly wasn't concerned with group identities, with how what was landed on her plate got to be landed on her plate. She wasn't concerned about the fact that she didn't choose this role that she was born into. The role that she was born into came with a bunch of duties, and we can talk about them, that utterly dictated her life, took away most of the freedoms that you and I take for granted. Yes, she had big palaces, but she didn't get to choose how to enjoy them in a way that you and I can choose how we enjoy our much smaller houses, right? So what I'm saying is her idea of morality was personal. Her moral responsibility was a responsibility that she believed could only be fulfilled by fulfilling her duty. So she thought that her work could only be measured, and her moral worth could only be measured by what she did with respect to her duty. That is very different, I was saying in the article, from how we think about morality today. Today, when we think about morality, when people make moral claims, when people want to feel that they're doing the right thing, what they're more often doing is making declarations. They're not really living any better. than the guy next door or the woman in the next street. What they're doing is they're making claims, they're making statements, often political or cultural, that because they believe are correct statements morally, they believe somehow reflects their own morality, somehow shows them to be better because they have the right beliefs. She wasn't about having the right beliefs. She was about living the right life, fulfilling her duty, doing what for her was the right thing because of the thing she was born into. And she didn't complain. She would have had every right to have complained. Just as we have a right to say, well, she got this privilege and she didn't earn it. She could have said, I've got all of these freedoms taken away from me. My entire life is controlled by the state, and I didn't ask for that either. She didn't kick about against it. She could have. We have had, famously, monarchs who've abdicated, right? Because they could not sign up to the pressures of the role. So there was something in her moral humility that went with her living out of duty that I think we can contrast with our present day very political morality, that it's not about I'm going to quietly get on and do the right thing. It's more about I'm going to loudly tell everybody else what is the right thing. And I was contrasting those two things. And I think we don't have that conversation in those ways. Usually, we don't think of these two ways of living out morality, one declarative and impositive, and the other personal and practical. But the death of the Queen, I think, struck people because even though we hadn't been talking about it, we knew it was a thing. Like when we lost that kind of personal morality and sense of duty, a rather old-fashioned kind of sense of doing the right thing, I think people were like, oh my goodness, she was it. Where else do we have it? Because actually that could be said to be half of morality. It's not just what you say. It's not just what you believe. It's what you do. And the Queen was the exemplar of doing what was wanted or needed of her without complaint.
You mentioned earlier that the Brits, they want their queen, or their monarchy now, because there's no queen anymore. Can you speak a bit about that? Why is that? Plenty of people in the world don't want monarchy anymore. They want a more, I would say, democratic system. I don't know if it's the right word. When they elect a president or someone that they can get rid of eventually, right?
Yes.
And so why such an attachment in UK and to the monarchy, and what do you say to those who want to get rid of it, who have arguments against it, say, hey, monarchy, it's something from the past. We are in the 21st century. Again, going back to this privilege issue, especially exacerbate nowadays with the whole white privilege and everything we've been hearing so far. Why do you think the UK citizens are still attached to the monarchy?
So I think for many of the reasons that I've said, I mean, I think largely most of the British citizens who favour the monarchy, which is the overwhelming majority, the only monarch they've seen is the Queen. Mm-hmm. And they have seen this role executed with more dignity, with more dutifulness, with less ego, et cetera, than they can see any other politician.
Everything you're saying is, I think, when some of our leaders here who have been in power for 40, 50 years, I won't say names, could take an example from the Queen, right?
Right.
It looks like
that, and I think that's it.
Yeah,
it's like, every country has huge problems with respect to political offices and officers, right? Yeah. So if you were going to get rid of one, why would you get rid of the best one we've got on those metrics, right? On those metrics. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are plenty of good arguments against the monarchy, constitutional or otherwise. But I would also point out that the Queen... Let's talk about privilege that actually can affect, indeed hurt other people. President Biden signs more executive orders in 1 week than the British monarchs have signed in 300 years. The number that the British monarchs have signed in 300 years, by the way, is 0, because they don't have the privilege to make executive orders, despite their being the head of state, right?
Yeah.
Like Biden does. And I'm not picking on Biden. Bush did and Trump did. They all do, right? So, as was pointed out by commentators at the time of the founding, what the Americans actually did at the founding, and again, this can be argued, but I'm just saying the argument is there, is they created a situation where you really did have a monarch. You had a despotic monarch who could be replaced every 4 years. Whereas what the British did was keep a symbolic monarch that sets an example and moderates the excesses of the political system, right? In the kind of ways we discussed. The ideologically driven kind of political outcomes. So the Brits kind of, maybe you could say, kept the monarch with the capital M and got rid of all the monarchies with the little m. Whereas most other countries have little m monarchies because they have people like the President of the United States that has the privilege to not pass laws on their own, but with executive orders actually pass laws on their own. So although it doesn't look like it, the British system is moderating. Now, we can say, thankfully, of the American system, I believe this is true, that it has not produced self-declared fascists and communists in the, let's say, the Congress, in the House. But same in the UK. The British have never actually had a sitting fascist or communist in Parliament on a continent where all the other countries have, right? Now, again, you see here, some commentators suggest the moderating influence of monarchy. Now, the other thing that I think we like in the United Kingdom, and I kind of like in the abstract, is that all countries have, quite rightly, ceremony and pomp associated with their nation, right? In the UK, the nation is symbolized non-politically and non-ideologically. So it enables you to use the trappings of nationhood that can move people psychologically and patriotically in ways that cannot be harnessed for evil if only a political leader can exercise them, right? Can use them. So, for example, if you were in Germany in the 30s, then the symbols of Germany that might fill you with pride as a German were necessarily Nazi, right? The symbols of America now, the seal of the president, they are, some of them, necessarily democratic, because the president is democratic, right? They come in that flavor. They came in a different flavor under Trump and a different flavor under Bush. When it comes to Britain, the monarchy enables people to experience themselves as British without identifying with a particular political leader, ideology, or perspective. And that is so healthy. And I think it saves us from political excess. And it saves us from depths of division that we see in most of the rest of the world, because the monarchy is the second most popular institution in the UK. It unifies people across political ideology. Now, does that make it sensible? Does it make it kind of rational? Would it make it, as I say, the system you'd set up? Probably not. But my goodness, if you've got it and you're enjoying those benefits as a culture, you'd have to be really careful before getting rid of it, because not only is everything I've said, I think, true, you notice that the rest of the world kind of envy it. They might not want to admit it, but the response to the Queen's death tells you that in some way, even the rest of the world who think that monarchy is a bit crazy, they look at it and they go, there's something there. Because otherwise they wouldn't care a damn, or they would just laugh at it when the lady with the silly crown dies. Like,
well, someone did. I mean, I think more than we thought, more than we think, probably did laugh it off. But yeah, I think you have a good point. A lot people, a lot also people in the world have um, mourned her death and her years of service. So yeah, you're making a great point. Let me jump to another question I wanted to ask you. You and I, we made an oath to fight for and try to preserve this republic we live in, the Republic of this Constitutional Republic of the United States of America. And what do you think are the big differences between the way we govern the America is being governed and the UK is being governed with a monarch in the UK and a president here? And do you think that I believe the US Constitution is a formidable document. Was well thought for the time when it was built. Yeah, exactly. And I have the same somewhere. Um, but you can also maybe hear some people say, hey, maybe having a monarchy in the US may be a better solution. I don't think so personally, but if there was an argument for or against it, what would it be?
The problem is that the reason the monarchy works in the UK, if you agree that it does work, is to do with history, right?
Yeah.
The fact is that it's evolved, it's organic, it's not constructed. Nobody could have conceived this.
Yeah, yeah.
It's I would say it's anti-fragile in the sense of kind of Taleb, right? Nassim Taleb, for those who want to check out that reference. But by what I mean by that is it's not a kind of like a logically determined perfect answer to a problem. It's not like the answer to a math equation. Okay, we've got to set up a state and make it work optimally. The answer is, a monarch. No, it's not that. But what the Brits, I mean, this is super important, but this could be an entire kind of an hour lecture. What the Brits, I think, have managed to do in their history, what really sets it apart, and I'm aware I'm talking to a Frenchman, so you are a good foil for what I'm about to say. The Brits have always managed to just to not have the revolution, to not have the reign of terror. Now, the closest we came was in the 1600s with the British Civil War. That was pretty damn close. And you may even said we did it, actually. But then, if you're British, you might say, we came to our senses and we moderated it and we invited the monarchy back that got overthrown in the revolution of the 17th century with Cromwell and so on, and the Republic, the 11-year Republic. Britain has been a republic. It was a republic for 11 years. And so... and how that's happened is the power has always been given from the monarch to the people more and more over the decades and centuries, and the people's representatives, as in the House of Commons, such that the monarchy would be tolerable, right? And so there's a sense in which the history of British politics really is evolutionary rather than revolutionary. And there's been this kind of balance. Now, in the United States, we talk about the separation of powers, which is a very important principle. Of course, by the way, the principles on which the American Constitution is based were almost entirely, and I know what the argument's going to be against this, but almost entirely, born of the British Isles where we had the monarchy. So there's a whole discussion to be had there. But
I apologize. Also, I think I hear often something like the English common law, something like this, that we are using too here in the US.
Yes, very much so. And I was talking about the separation of powers, which come out of that conception. But in Britain, we also have another separation of powers, which is the one, the few, the many. And what you have in governance is the few over the many. Look at Congress, look at the Senate, look at the EPA, it's all the few over the many. The one, the monarch, can set itself or herself or himself, and this has happened throughout history, against the few. because what the monarch also has to defend is the country of the many, right? The monarch has to last like the many has to last when the few, the government of the few, as they change and as they disappear and so on and so forth. So, this, some of these things are quite subtle and I think quite deep. Tennyson wrote a wonderful poem, and it might have been called 1813, something, or it might have been written in 1813, where he said that one of the things that the British should be most proud about is that their sons were the Americans who rebelled against their British parents. That the Brits instilled in the Americans such values that at the right moment, those Brits who became Americans said to the British, you know what? It's time for us to go, and we're going to carry these essentially British values with us, and we're going to do it better than you did. Now, I feel as an Anglo-American, as a British American, that that the difference between my two countries can be well understood as two different manifestations, expressions of rather fundamental and general values and conceptions. And and I love the written constitution here for the same reasons that you do. I absolutely, I mean, you've read my things I've written. It is a formidable document, and it's a more formidable conception. But if you actually go to the Declaration of Independence, even the founders who wrote the Constitution said clearly that its authority and its value and its power rests on the demos, rests on the people, right? It doesn't work on its own. So what you need is a certain it's kind of normalized to the mind, the will, the culture of the people. Now in the UK we have an unwritten organic constitution, right? It's not technically unwritten because there are constitutional documents, but it's not formalized like this. Now the reason that's really good is that it stops you making the mistake, as people like you and I often make in the US, that the Constitution should do its job because it alone can do its job. No, these bits of paper on the wall behind me, the Constitution, they only work in as much as Americans care for them to work and are going to do the work, right? That Americans take responsibility for those values and know that they have to manifest the values, indeed the rules in the Constitution. So the British way being more organic, it's not formalized, and there are benefits from that. Now, there are downsides from that, because clearly having it formalized can be useful. When cases go to the Supreme Court, you think, thank God, it's there.
It's there.
Nobody can gainsay it. So it cuts both ways, and being British American, I can feel it both ways.
So, as you speak, I have tons of questions. I'm trying to write them down, but I have one for you that I think hopefully it doesn't make you uncomfortable. But I think that people listening to this podcast today may ask themselves, okay, in my opinion, you painted a great picture of the monarchy in the UK, or at least the Queen. But you decided, you as a UK citizen, to come to the US.
Yes.
The US was founded against the monarchy somehow, right?
That's right.
So tell us what made you want to come to America. What are those values, those liberties, the freedoms that you didn't have there, that you come seek here? I think a lot of people may ask themselves this question, saying, well, Robin has painted a great picture of the monarchy. I think you did a great job, but you came to America. You became a US citizen. Why?
Okay, great question. I'm glad you asked it. Because first of all, the political system and the political culture is only a small fraction of your lived experience in a country, right? So, second of all, you said something that I have actually said, I think verbatim, that the idea of America being set up against the British monarchy. Now, it was, but it was a French philosopher, Renan, that said this, right? Every nation has its founding myth, and the founding myth of America is broadly that what you just said, it was founded against the British or against the British monarchy, is most of, or the core point of its foundation or its founding story. As a Brit, it is clear to me that whilst that is true, it is the smallest part of the founding.
Mhm.
What was actually founded was a deeply Anglo response to a moment in which, as the Americans themselves said, and when I say Americans, of course, I mean patriots in the American colonies. I mean British people in the American colonies, because they were British
They
when
were
they said,
British.
right?
Yeah.
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 They said, look, you guys right now back in London, not least of all you, Georgie the Third, you seem to have forgotten the values that we Englishmen care about and the rights and the freedoms that we have by virtue of being English. They actually said that in remonstrance after remonstrance back to London. And we could talk about that. This is in the run up to the Revolutionary War. So, and these remonstrances were ignored, which was kind of how we got to the Declaration of Independence in the first place. Put that aside for now. The Brits who became Americans against the Brits who were back on the British Isles did so consciously to secure what they believed was their birthright as Englishmen. So what we have here is an expression of mostly the same values as have also been imperfectly manifest in Britain. So first of all, I want to say that. It's not like I didn't have the values and the freedoms in England, then I come to America and they're all here, right? Neither side of that is quite the case. First of all, I have a load of them there, but not all of them. And I have a load of them here, but not all of them, right? So why did I come to America? I felt very at home in America for reasons that are related to the question you're asking me directly, but they really are more cultural. They are all more psychological, I would say. I think you and I, Ismaine, have talked about how there's something still, this is a cliche, there's something in the air, in the spirit of America that is can do, that is success orientated, that
Yes.
enjoys success, that holds people up. That whereas I come from a culture, the British culture is one that is much less celebratory of success and achievement, of trying and failing. It's more reserved, let us say socially, culturally, than America. So I just found a personality match here. America is a more extroverted society. That brings out some things in me. It makes me more effective in ways that I wanted to be more effective. Now, these are related to the values of freedom, opportunity seeking, and liberty that you and I talk about and care about so much. And indeed, there are many of these things that are in the US that I would love to see my old native land get more of. But then,
Same for me for France. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, of course. And which explains why you left France and I left Britain to some extent, right? But that also cuts it the other way. I bet there are a few things that you think the Americans could learn from the French,
Oh,
just as like there are a
absolutely.
few things that the Americans could learn
Not
from
only
the
from
British.
the French, from the rest of the world, generally speaking, there are a few things that
Indeed.
we American could learn.
Yeah, indeed. So, and maybe we should do. I mean, in a way, that's the whole point of this channel, isn't it, Ismaine? But
It is.
maybe we could do a show next on, the top thing or the top 3 things that you think America does, or we think America does need to learn from the rest of the world. And I can, 2 spring to mind immediately. One is humility, and the other is a historical sensibility. And the monarchy, to go back to where this all began, it keeps us connected to history, which means to our mistakes as well, in ways that we wouldn't be connected if we didn't have the monarchy. That's an important psychological and cultural phenomenon in the UK.
So we are at 56 minutes. I'm going to ask you a last question. You guys. I don't know if I can say that. My apologies, but the UK, United Kingdom people have a new king. Uh, King Charles. He is now, I'm checking, 73 years old. So is coming to power much later than his mom, right? His mom was 26, if I'm not mistaken. He's 73. So he's an older gentleman, right? What are your wishes for him for his rule of the United Kingdom and the 14 other Commonwealth realms?
Mm.
And I'm going to ask you this question: shouldn't he leave his seat to his son?
He's got to do his stint. I mean, he's got to do his stint, right? Like he has no reason to abdicate. I think abdicating would be more problematic, and I think he's. I mean, it is true that he has been prepared his whole life for this, right?
Yeah, he
And
was.
he is better prepared for it than William can possibly be. And I'm sure that William's dad's being king will help prepare William for his turn. So I've got no problem with any of that. I mean, the whole thing is a bit bizarre. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But what do I wish for him? I mean, I guess this is a lazy answer, but I wish for him in the ways that we've discussed to get as close to his mum in the way he executes this, as as he possibly can. I don't know how anybody can follow. Um, I mean, I don't mean that literally, but you know what I mean, kind of figuratively. How can anybody follow the Queen? Um, but he will. And
He has big
yeah,
shoes to fill, though, right?
he's got. Yeah, I
That's
mean, they're just about
yeah,
the biggest shoes in the world, aren't they?
yeah. Robin, thank you so much. That was a great time, guys. Please make sure that you like this video, you subscribe to our channel, and help us grow. We are back. We're going to try to make more videos with great content like this, talking about things that you may not have heard before. But even if you heard about something, we are going to try to give you our perspective. Next show, I don't know, maybe we're going to talk about those of the things that we like and we don't like here in America, and how American can take a look at the world to improve and be more successful. That might be the subject of the next video. But in the meantime, Robin, thank you so much for educating us about what happened with the Queen when she was alive, and the future of the UK with the new king. And I hope that you're going to follow our next adventure with the next video. So thank you so much, Robin. Thank you for being here and listening to us.